Welcome back to Good Evening. Now it's time for When Monet Meets Debussy, where Christine joins us in the studio to discuss art and everything in between. There's so much there, and I can't wait to jump into it. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Just all right.
Yeah.
I'm doing okay as well. I think it stopped raining, so that's good. For a long time stopped raining. I'm fingers crossed. I hope that the rainy season is tapered off. I don't know how you feel. Maybe you like the rain or enjoy it.
Well, it's been so unusually long this year, and I think all of us would be relieved to have it be over soon. But I do know it's going to rain in the rest of the country for a little bit, so we might be seeing some more rain. Who knows?
Maybe. You never know. It's hard to predict. But on those rainy days, it's nice to explore some artwork, either from your home or maybe going somewhere to check it out. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So what art are we going to be discussing?
Okay, so a little bit of a background on the artist that we will be talking about today. He is a Korean artist, and he's actually a defining figure in the domestic movement toward modernism. He is also one of the most loved Korean artists today.
Oh.
He is known for the hardship and heartbreak he had to endure when he lived through the Japanese colonialism, and then the country's independence, and also the Korean War. And throughout his life, he moved from one place to another seeking refuge. So he experienced poverty and separation from his family, and through all of this, he actually never let go of his passion toward art. So he had this playful, dynamic drawings that capture childlike freedom and boldness, and he held on to those things. He became one of the most defining figures in forming a uniquely Korean voice in art.
Oh, well, I'm going to try to rack my brain and think, who are you discussing? But while I'm thinking about that, can you maybe give us a description and talk about the painting?
All right, let's get into it. Playful figures move around the waves with their arms stretched forward in various directions, holding or grasping for large fish the size of their torsos. Their bodies are drawn with simple, bold lines, abstracted yet confident, like the content expression on their faces. Their legs are dynamic, folded over and under as if they're running, jumping, tiptoeing, reaching in every direction, dancing around in the waters. Stripes of lines run all across the water, forming an abstracted pattern of triangular crests of waves. They're mimicked in the rounded pattern of stripes running across the top border of the drawing, depicting the movement of the sky above. The entire scene, drawn in with lines, sit on the backdrop of washed-out paint strokes in blues, yellows, and terracotta reds. The composition is mostly phthalo blue, a deeper blue with hints of pine green. Then there are large strokes of earthy terracotta running across the bodies. But it's not rendered nothing more than a stroke or maybe two. There are also yellow strokes placed mostly across the fish, but also across the bright sky above and here and there to create highlights in the composition.
That was such a lovely description, and I have to say, I can't think of who we're talking about. Who is this?
Okay, well, if you haven't heard of him before, the artist we're talking about today is Lee Jung Seob, and his artwork is titled Children on the Seashore, which is a drawing made with pencil and oil on paper. It's about 30 by 50 centimeters in size.
Centimeters? Really?
Yeah.
That's not as big as I'd imagine it to
Not
be.
very big.
This actually, you were lucky, kind enough to provide us with, a picture of the artwork. But I have to say, he is very unique in the sense that I was imagining, I guess through your description, more detailed artwork. But in this case, it's almost more of like a Keith Haring kind of, there's definitely figures and people, but it's such a lovely conglomeration of all of them.
Yeah, and the the kids, they're just so simplified, like you're saying, and their bodies, they could be one another. Like you can't really distinguish any of them
it's
apart
almost
from
like
each
a
other.
puzzle piece.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it feels like a sort of pattern you might see on maybe pottery or like, wallpaper even.
Yeah.
There's a lot of lines and a lot of hidden images of fish and children here and there, and a lot of waves, And his drawings are actually characterized by these simple, bold lines. They're dynamic, but they're also balanced and stable in their composition. And when I was a kid, I remember thinking, I could draw that.
I was just thinking that. I was thinking, okay, I could probably draw that. Just the faces on it is exactly how I would draw like a stick figure if I ever did one.
Exactly. And, this is the type of thing that, a lot of people think when they see, artworks by people like Picasso or Matisse. They have these like children-like compositions, and that's actually what the modernists were after. They wanted to push against the Western tradition of these highly elaborate rendered artworks that look lifelike, and they wanted to strip down the compositions to the bare minimum. Just bold lines, scarce primary colors, and capturing this, energy, mood, and spirit that you see from an artwork with as little as possible.
I think he does an amazing job doing this. And, when you take a look at it, on the surface, it does look fairly simple, but something in that simplicity, it just kind of, you get lost in it somewhere. I don't know if it's in the kind of different lines or those hidden fish, like you said, but something really draws you into this painting.
Yeah, and it's very dynamic. And what I found interesting is, European artists, they were looking to African or Asian aesthetic traditions to find, these sort of simpler, modern compositions. But for African and Asian artists, modernism had another role because modernism really pushed for a unique aesthetic voice. And countries that were coming out of colonialism, like Korea at the time, they wanted to find a unique Korean voice. It was really important for them in the process of decolonization. Decolonization. And Korea had not only to find itself, but also it needed to set itself apart on a global stage, tell people, this is what Korea is all about.
Oh, well, it seemed like he was one of the first artists to do this, and what a strong voice he had. At the same time, I'm very curious about, maybe a little bit more of his artwork. I want to say I've seen this before, but I don't know if I've seen this exact one. I've been to a couple art museums for Korean artists, but I don't exactly recognize his, paintings.
Yeah, well, his style is very unique. So I think if you've seen an artwork that reminds you of this one, it was probably his.
Okay.
But that being said, there are also a lot of replicas because people wanted to look like his
Really?
artwork. Yeah. And what's interesting is unlike his, naive looking drawings, Lee Jung Seob actually grew up in a very wealthy family. He was given one of the best art educations that were available at the time.
Wow, really?
Yeah. He started off in present-day North Korea, and he went to an art high school, and he learned under the tutelage of a Yale University master's program graduate. So that was actually a very prestigious program at the time as well. And his mentor, who graduated from Yale, he had visited Paris a lot, and so he was able to teach Lee Jung Seob about the modernist movement in Paris, including people like Matisse, part of the Fauvists. And so the influence here is quite apparent in Lee's works. So he's doing this with very consciously as well. And he learned about Western painting during his time there. Now, he also learned about Korean culture and the idea of advocating for Korean heritage because Korea was under Japanese colonial rule at the time, and this was a big issue for the Korean artists.
Oh, well, it's very interesting that he was able, because I guess when you imagine, early 1900s, you don't imagine Yale master's program in present-day North Korea and artists kind of coming up with tutelage from teachers who studied in Paris. There's so much, smaller world than I thought. I thought it was more separated, but it seems like it's very much together. And under all of that, or I guess kind of overshadowing all of that is that colonial idea and escaping. That really sets the stage for some amazing artwork to be made.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to mention was after his high school, he actually went to university in Japan. And, he was a Korean artist in Japan. And he joined an avant-garde movement at the time. But he also, had to set his voice. So that's why he started painting a lot of bulls, because for him, bulls represented Korea, and
Really?
he was a Korean. Yeah, so it was kind of like his alter ego.
Oh, man. Now that I'm thinking about those painted bulls, I can kind of see that artwork a little bit more. There have been so many different kinds, but I think there's other ones besides bulls, right?
Yeah, there are a ton that look like the one that we're talking about today. And so I wanted to talk about these as well, because the artwork we're talking about today was painted during a special time. After he graduated from university, he went back to his hometown, and then the Korean War broke out. So he, after having married a Japanese woman while he was in Japan, had 2 children with her, and they had to take refuge in southern Korea. So they came all the way down to Busan and then to Jeju Island. And he stayed there with his family for about a year when he painted this.
Oh, so this actually takes place in I guess you could say it could take place anywhere, but in Jeju, he was there. So probably this scene is something representing a scene that you would see in a Jeju, I guess, fishing port or just beach, and lots of kids fishing.
Yeah, I think so. And, he says that his time at Jeju was one of the happiest times of his life. He had very little money, and he was living in a tiny room with his entire family. But because he was with his family, it seemed that the artwork coming out during this period of his life, they were very happy and joyful. And, he's making very purposeful choices in his drawing here as well. So the bull drawings, they hint at, sort of the calligraphy strokes that we see in Korean calligraphy works.
Yeah.
Whereas these type of drawings, he is pointing towards Korean buncheongware, which is a type of painted pottery tradition. And we see a lot of patterned line drawings on these pottery. And they're almost identical to the pattern of fish that we see here. I've seen these fish on the pottery before. And, those pottery also have things like the bold strokes of paint and glaze washing over them as well.
I wonder if he was into studying pottery. I know a lot of artists, especially Korean artists, they kind of cut their teeth using also pottery as a way to express their paintings. But, it just seems like this painting isn't of its time. When was this painting painted?
It was painted in 1951, and what's crazy is that, it doesn't really indicate anything about what was going on historically at the time. He is in his first year of asylum from a war, and he was forced to leave his hometown and leave his mother to go to a remote island. But, when I look at this painting, it reminded me of, there are a lot of things about the Korean history that are untold. Stories, we see a lot of hardship and heartbreak during the Korean War, but also there are stories of love, family, and hope. Despite the world around them. Families continue on. They try to maintain the life that they knew and pass down their tradition and wisdom to their children. Well, children, they play by the ocean. They catch fish. And the ocean continues to provide fish, and the nature continues to feed the people around them. So I'm really inspired by all the, nature that we also see in Korean artworks during this time as well.
I just think it's nice that when you look at this painting, yes, it was painted during such a very, political time and just a lot of tumultuousm going on. At the same time, it's so happy. It reflects his life, and almost that, like you said, you can have some joy. You can find these everyday moments and the beauty in them. And he does a really great job of capturing that. At the same time, time, it could have also feel like it'd been painted, recently. It's very modern for 1951. I do recommend our listeners go and check it out. I think you're going to be really surprised to just see just how fresh it looks.
Yeah, and the Korean title for this is 바닷가의 아이들.
Oh, okay.
So children on the beach.
Children on the beach.
Seashore. Yeah. So, it's also interesting because I think throughout the hardship, Koreans, they, persisted and they really pushed through and survived. And it shows the strength and the hope that Koreans had at this time as well. When I look at him, I'm thinking, how can he feel this way? And I think it's because he was looking at his children.
Oh, yeah. So I'm assuming maybe the children are somewhere in the paintings. There's a lot of kids in there. And just the fact that he was able to, kind of look at them and see joy in their faces, capture that joy, and it just seems like a normal day almost. Like it kind of sets itself up. Sometimes when you get artwork that is very of its time, make a statement, maybe have very political overtones. This is really, truly a classic painting.
I think so. I like to think personally that the children are the tiny little figures by the horizon because the entire drawing is quite dynamic, but there's a little bit of a pause, like a break in the lines with the tiny boat that's on the top right corner. And we see two little figures, and one of them is raising its hand. And I think this might be his children. I feel like it's sort of showing that in this, youthful and energetic paradise, he sees his children and they're going off to a horizon ahead of them.
Oh, that is very, very poetic. And, do you know what happened after this painting happened? What happened with the rest of them?
Well, unfortunately, after this, he was separated from his family.
Oh, no.
So there was a lot of sadness that comes after. But, this does show that, throughout his career, that he was really focused on his love for his family, his children, and also for his country.
Yeah, it really shows that he had a lot of inspiration, and he turned that kind of heartache and strife into some beautiful artwork. And thank you so much for introducing that to me. I have to go and do maybe a deep dive into some more works, and I'll see you back here next week.
I'll see you next week.